it's pointless having a metric that doesn't let you do something about it, or that if you do improve it, it gives no value to the business. So you're looking at things like vulnerabilities. Am I handling those vulnerabilities on a timely basis and prioritizing the critical ones that are critical to my business applications? That's important. So moving people off we want you to reduce number of vulnerabilities by X% each quarter, to can you show us that you're handling all of your critical vulnerabilities on platforms that host a critical service within a 2-week timeframe? That's much better.
Quite interesting, the idea of business criticality versus what data's going through there. I never had that conversation before, but it makes perfect sense.
Hello, everyone. You're listening to Cloud Next, your go-to source for cloud innovation and leaders' insight, brought to you by Global Dots.
Security in the banking sector is a delicate balancing act. On the one hand, you have strict regulations and a low tolerance for risk, and on the other, the constant demand for innovation and the move to the cloud, which push these boundaries every day. How do you foster a culture where security becomes a business enabler rather than a blocker? I'm Ganesh Awesome, Solutions Architect at Global Dots, and today we're joined by Rory Alsop, Head of Information Security at Cyber Risk in Tesco Bank. Rory brings a wealth of experience in navigating these challenges, fostering culture change and aligning risk with innovation. He is also the Deputy Chair of the Information Security Forum, a global thought leadership community advancing best practices in security. Rory, before we start, what should people know about you? Tell the listener a little bit about yourself.
Okay, yeah, thanks for inviting me on to talk. My background is really, I came from a long tech network admin, systems admin background. So came up through the ranks in technology, but at the turn of the century, started leading teams in security and cyber risk. So 12 or 14 years worth in consultancy roles, so working mostly with financial services, also with a number of other industries. And then more recently in key senior roles in global and national banks. So focusing very heavily on what can we do, as you highlighted in your introduction, how could we position security in a place that works with the business? So my focus has been very much around getting that flavor where we're not stifling the business, but we are enabling the business to progress safely. So for the past 9 years now, very much banking, very much leading the way and giving a direction based on industry good practice, which is where the ISF comes in, based on expectations of the year, 2 years, 3 years ahead, looking at that threat horizon, and a lot of it down to just personal experience. What we've been through, everyone's seen the pain points. There's various different routes to fixing those, and I'm sure we'll get a chance to chat about some solutions to make security a little bit more of an enabler rather than that traditional blocker.
Thanks for that intro, and it's close to my heart. And I have also a similar kind of a background because I was a service desk type person and worked my way up through the ranks, and then eventually ended up working in the banking sector myself. So I know a lot about the pains of security in that environment, and they're definitely the most stringent, and most of the time the pushback from developers, that is the hatred, I would say, of the security people inside an IT department is well known. You've worked in this culture change business quite extensively. What are some of the key lessons that you could teach us about cultural change to stop us being seen as blockers and actually seeing us as enablers?
Well, I think initially it was a well-earned reputation, because security back in the day was very much a no. It was a stop. You can't do this. It's not safe. Yes, you built something, but no. And that was for very good reason way back when, where you had a perimeter. It was your security. Everything outside was bad. Everything inside was safe. So it was very black and white. The challenge with that is you don't innovate. What can you do? Because any business decision takes risks. Now, the mature position for a business is it takes risks. It takes credit risk. It takes market risks. Cyber is just another one of those. How much risk do you want to take? So getting into that position really requires a fundamental change around what security does, as well as how it looks at it. So if I give a simple example, traditional development of a new software application, security would come along at the end and check it and go, oh no, here's some unsafe things, go and fix them. And that's not timely. It's after typically the due date. It breeds resentment because you're stopping all this good work. Whereas moving to a functionality where security or cyber risk is upfront with the developers at that initial architecture stage, here are things you can do that are safe by their very structure. Why not use them as your building blocks? So by the time you've gone through it, being part of that process along the way, there'll still be some end checks, but it's not that gatekeeping role. It's more of a, we helped you do these things safer. You could do other things if you want, but you're taking more risk. So you start putting a good chunk of that decision making on risk to the business owner. Do you want to take a bit more risk? You can. You might be able to accelerate this process, but it's a little bit more dangerous for you. And the role of a cyber risk team is to help them effectively understand how much that extra risk is worth. If I look at a startup, startups are all about taking a lot of risk because you can't afford to put all the controls in place. You're typically trying to get your product out, bang, bang, bang. Your turnover rate is really high. There's a bunch of controls you want to put in there, but if you try and hammer them in too early, you just stifle everything. So, whereas at the other end of the field, you've got bricks and mortar banks that have been around for 100 years, very heavily regulated. You don't want to go above your risk position, because if you do, you're going to have to talk about that to shareholders, to the regulator, to audit. You can take higher risk, but you've got to be able to justify it, and it's got to be there for a business reason. So you've almost got that entire continuum of high risk for high return right now, a more stable platform where you do want to take incremental risks for certain reasons, but then you probably want to remediate them again once that reason's away.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And yeah, it's interesting talking about that conversation you have with people, because we're in the old days of being the gatekeeper, and I've since sort of moved out of that world, so I don't do any of the gatekeeper business stuff. But in the old world of being the gatekeeper, I feel like the problem was that there was a gate and it was at the end. There wasn't a conversation happening at the beginning. So the sort of secure by design and giving people frameworks and having tools plugged into their code, doing static code analysis from the moment they're developing them to give a higher level view. We're probably in a much better place now than we have been historically.
Yeah, and you've got that with a lot of the majority of developers around the world these days use Agile. Even if your wider business doesn't, Agile is very much a thing that software development it works well within. And being able to build security modules as non-functional requirements, so that at your very first set of stand-ups and your PI planning, you understand what's going into it. Again, decision can be made to not use those, but it's higher effort. You've got a smooth, low-friction pathway which has pre-approved modules that the risk is understood and they follow the framework and guidance. Use those. Everything's easy. It's quick. It's low effort. Bang, you get it out the door. If you decide to take a different route, use a new technology, a new platform, okay, there is some more oversight needed. So it does become slightly higher risk. So you find that behaviors follow the slightly lower friction route. So it's almost getting the right behaviors just by showing the easy pathway, but allowing other things if business really wants to do them.
Yeah. And I definitely feel like there's an unrespected, or not unrespected, that's not quite the right word. There's a misunderstood social role of a lot of the security practice in order to become friendly with the teams, or to see you as a cohort as to what they're doing, as opposed to, we better hide what we're doing from the security guy in case we get caught doing what we're doing. And I'm guilty. I've been on both sides of the fence. I know it for sure. I've seen it and done it. But I think with that sort of social role is definitely sort of, not everybody has it. And I tend to sort of think without trying to be too disparaging to my colleagues out there in the tech world, we're a lot of us are keyboard and mouse people. We weren't designed for front of stage and trying to do that. But
a lot of this is around changing cultures, and as such, it needs the people-to-people communication. Two of the big roles that I've taken in global banks have been off the back of a Section 166 report from the regulator, which is basically you have failed in governing your cyber risk effectively, fix it. And it's quite a high threat from a regulator. So you're building or entirely changing an organization from failing to manage this, failing to govern it, to accepting that building a team, we're going to be making recommendations. So there's a lot of credentializing yourself. Why are we the ones who can come in and tell you what to change? We resent someone coming in and telling us that everything we're doing is wrong. So being able to do that, credentialize yourself, articulate why this is a good thing for not only the technical developers, because it does reduce their personal risk. It's better for the business because they get a better view of what's coming. In reality, pushing this through is one of these things that you can't do at developer level or individual business level. It's very much you've got to get the tone from the top. So when we think about what metrics make this work, if I've got a business where the key metrics are around profitability or growth or delivery to customers, that's what's going to drive everyone's behavior. Because that's what everyone's going to get their bonus on, that's what they'll get paid for. So getting something in at remuneration committee level or exco level, which says you're also going to have a requirement that might be based around sustainable community. It might be based around risk management or risk reduction for customers, for colleagues, for different areas of the business. That's key because honestly, without it, those business leaders are not going to drive things that aren't going to lead to them taking their maximum take home. It's very commercial at that level where you have metrics. That's what your business expects from you. You do them. So there's an aspect which is aligning that very commercial nature of, well, what's in it for me at Remco level, all the way down to, well, what are we wanting to see for our customers, for our colleagues, for the community at large? And it's not easy. Like I say, the initial view when I've come in and done this in organizations is resentment, distrust. You look like you're coming in to pick holes with what I'm doing. I'm going to get in trouble. Whereas in reality, the challenge is getting them to listen to I'm actually going to come in and get you budget to fix the things that you know are wrong without you getting in trouble for it. Because once it's already broken, there's no point coming in and wrapping someone over the knuckles saying, it's all your fault, you're fired. Because they've already been in there. They probably know the problem. What's much better is say, bring out your dead. Let's have a good look at everything that's in there. Let's empty the skeletons out of the closets and ensure that you get budget for the ones that are important to materially reduce risk for the business. If you then mess up afterwards, that's maybe a separate conversation. But you might as well give the benefit of the doubt of moving from a punitive culture or a finger-pointing culture to one which is more open. It's focused on doing the right thing for the business, and it brings security along into that new world. It's very healthy all round. We've not, over the many years I've done it, I've not seen anywhere that has disapproved at an organisation level. There's been some individuals who've gone, well, I'd like my bit to not have any reds on it. Because in the old world, reds, your red mark from audit or external audit would typically get you something dinged off your bonus if you were senior enough. But changing that around, say, you've got a red. If you make that amber or green in these timelines, that's you doing the right thing. We don't want you to then slip back to red. Or if you do, how fast you handle it, how effectively you handle it is now your new metric. It's just changing that flavour around.
And you talked quite a lot about those risk metrics. It would be interesting to know when you're pulling all of those skeletons out of the closet, how do you decide on like a risk KPI or what could people learn from you, basically, having done this quite a few times? Because I'm sure there's people listening thinking, well, we'd like to empty the skeleton closet, but they all just look like skeletons. So where do we begin?
That is quite a big bit of work. In working through this with one bank, we ended up with a couple of hundred local metrics that we could monitor that were useful. Not necessarily ones that go up to board level. I think they're still down to 10 or 11 in that case. But items that it's pointless having a metric that doesn't let you do something about it, or that if you do improve it, it gives no value to the business. So you're looking at things like vulnerabilities. Everyone has vulnerabilities. Old school boards would typically see you've got X thousand vulnerabilities. That's a big number. To my mind, the absolute number is pretty much irrelevant. It's probably better to have less, but if it's 10,000 or 800 or 60,000, probably not relevant. Am I handling those vulnerabilities on a timely basis and prioritizing the critical ones that are critical to my business applications? That's important. So moving people off we want you to reduce number of vulnerabilities by X% each quarter, to can you show us that you're handling all of your critical vulnerabilities on platforms that host a critical service within a 2-week timeframe? That's much better. You might still have a long tail of lower risk ones, but you're prioritizing those that have most material impact. I mean, none of this is rocket science, obviously, but it's a nice, simple example of moving to a more managed, or better governed vulnerability management system and getting off that old one takes you to a place where you can understand what you're doing with your risk. Similar to patching. We could say that we're patching 98% of our servers every month. Is that good? It might be more important to patch 100% of the critical servers and not worry so much about the others, or patch really critical vulnerabilities within a week, and some go to then a month. Ones lower down the tree might be a 3-monthly or next upgrade cycle. So again, it's prioritizing what's best bang for buck or best impact to the business as a whole.
That's quite interesting. And you say it's like fairly self-explanatory, and to people in the security business, it definitely is. One group of people that I would think it's probably, well, my own opinion, and I'll let you answer. One group of people that's probably not apparent to, I would imagine, are the financial regulatory authorities. So you'd say, talking about vulnerabilities in the stack, yes, this is a business critical app. This is just a backup app that does something in the background that's not front facing. But what does that look like in a regulatory way?
Regulators actually have really picked up the game over the last few years. There was always this reputation that they were a bit behind the curve. And to be fair, regulations have to be built for regions, for countries, and so typically they are a little bit behind the curve. But if you look across the regulators around the world today, there's much greater focus on not being prescriptive on, for example, patching. It's much more around, the key focus at the moment is around operational resilience. How can you show that your business is resilient in the current environment, knowing that there's external threats, knowing that ransomware is a very existential threat, knowing that outsource into the cloud, so you have a supply chain that might be many tiers deep within the cloud. How can you as a business show that you still are governing your business effectively, and worst case happens, you can recover? So it means the regulators get a chance to look at not just your protecting your external perimeter, you're doing firewall stuff, which classic stuff, we still need to do it, but also you're thinking all the way through, are you detecting attacks? Are you looking at everything that's happening in your cloud environment? And if the worst happens, do your backups work? Can you rebuild your organization to a point where you can manage to still be a business? Or are you down for longer that period and you've gone bust? So they're actually being very good, and they're sharing more information between them. So back in my HSBC days, we worked with regulators all around the world, and not to be too fine a point, there were many conflicting regulations where it would be hard to meet one and another. Now there's a lot more read across. So you've got HKMA looking at a particular set of regulations, and then you've got the Fed in the US looking at a particular set. They broadly meet the same requirements, and NIST has really helped us with this. So NIST from the US, it's still quite heavily focused. It's come from government initially. It was quite academic. It's getting more and more useful. But the combination of NIST and then the ISF standard of good practice, which takes a lot of what NIST has, but makes it a little bit easier to apply to an organization and to measure and to understand the risk from each decision. It means you can do, even in a global organization, you can monitor what you're doing, you can align that to the various regulations, and you can deliver consistently. So it puts you in a position where not only are you able to get a bit ahead of the curve, because you can see what regulations coming down the line, say the Fed and New York State legislation tend to be a wee bit ahead of the curve, whereas some of the other regulators are a little bit behind. But you can start to build that view which says, here's what we know is coming from the regulator this year. Here's what we think is coming next year. Let's plan ahead. Let's look at that forward pathway, which at the end of the day, it does save revenue. You're investing more sensibly in that longer pathway. But it means that you're getting an opportunity to re-highlight where you are already complying with regulation and have the discussions with the regulator to say, we're not quite on that one yet, but this is our plan to do it, so we will be there then. And that's a much better message to go proactively to regulate it rather than they come in and hit you with a big stick to say you didn't meet it.
Well, that's quite warming to know, because my days dealing with the regulators, which is, well, it must be 10 years ago now, and that was a nightmare, because we were some of the first people using AWS and they had no idea what AWS was. So we came up against enormous amounts of friction.
I remember those days.
It was quite good, especially when your backup was another region of AWS in the States. And it's like, well, what if both of those regions go down? And you're thinking, if we lose the United States and Ireland,
might be
I
a
think
bigger problem.
there's a meteor hit. But that move to the cloud and lots of those old 100-year-old banks have definitely not finished that, and I would say probably some maybe didn't even start that yet. Looking at that, what do you see as some of the biggest hurdles for those guys who are trying to do that, and keeping within the risk tolerance of those organizations? What does that look like?
You've got a couple of so there's pros and cons. I mean, if done well, an assessment of the services and application stack that you currently have so that you can then migrate it to the cloud gives you the opportunity to do a lot of modernization there. But honestly, a lot of companies don't do that. They do a lift and shift. So what you've got is all the things you knew about and didn't know about replicated into the cloud somewhere. And it suddenly gets a lot harder to figure out those things you didn't know, because one of the big things about cloud is you're losing hands-on visibility. Now, folks like AWS and others actually have rather amazing toolkits which let you find out a lot of discovery there. But where you've got kit in a data center, you could always go around and touch things. You could physically check every single item. You could check the linkages. It didn't require much imagination to see exactly where you would have problems. If you were an organization that did a lift and shift to the cloud, all of a sudden, what you're really seeing is communications coming back out of that cloud, and it becomes a little bit ephemeral. You don't really know what's there. There's dynamic platforms spinning up and down as you need them. So getting that accurate visibility of exactly what your estate currently consists of can be a problem. So I work with one organization that dynamically they would spin up and down by 20,000 odd servers over the course of a day. Gave them a licensing issue, which back then was before folks like Microsoft and some others had sorted out proper dynamic licensing. But it also meant that we didn't really know where we wanted perimeters around particular zones. We didn't know exactly where all the information pathways were. So we didn't really have a good way of articulating what our risk was at any particular time of day. As I say, AWS have brought in some rather good discovery tools, which helps a lot now. So you can understand what's in there. You can run tools like CrowdStrike, Qualys, etc., and get a pretty good understanding on. We know now what we've got. If we can modernize it, then that does make life an awful lot easier. One of the outstanding problems, especially for large organizations, we typically don't just plonk something into the cloud. We typically outsource microservices to multiple cloud vendors. They might outsource to multiple cloud vendors where we probably know our third parties pretty well, and maybe our big fourth parties. Beyond that, most organizations don't really know how deep their full supply chain goes. So you'll see a lot of comms these days around that understanding of entire end-to-end supply chain. Now, I don't see many large organizations doing this well yet. There's almost it's gone beyond fourth party, it's probably less important. Could be the case, but there's absolutely no way to rely on that. So I'm very cynical of companies that say that. I would far rather say, do we know what information is passed from this service? If we know what information is there, how critical is it? What's my worst case if it goes wrong? And almost making the demarcation lines beyond this point, even tainted data won't affect my business, or it won't affect my business decisions, or it won't be able to take me down. So that slightly changes the way we look at both data and services. We also have the availability issue. Is one of those services that underpins our core platform, is it run by one or two folks out of a garage? Because again, you might not know that. It's just a service. And we see more and more reports of small services that are compromised, or their maintainer sold them to somewhere because they were deciding to retire. There's no visibility of it, but it could underpin something rather critical. So I think, summarizing it, my real worry is visibility of not just the cloud services, but the full depth of the supply chain, which worries me. On a broader supply chain side, I still have a concern around it's a good route for ransomware or compromised credentials that allow an attacker into an organization, because you're just sharing so much information with so many platforms that you don't necessarily have any direct control over. And that should unnerve anyone a little bit, because that risk just spreads out. Losing your perimeter means that you're having to deal in less definites.
Very interesting what you said, and I had the same issue in migrating to the cloud, because I'm also old enough to remember that any piece of equipment that you put in there, you knew you put it in, and you knew what was going on with it, and then you arrive at the cloud, and obviously, when you first arrive, all the doors are shut, but it doesn't take very long for someone to start opening all the doors, and then you don't know where you are. Quite interesting, the idea of business criticality versus what data's going through there. I never had that conversation before, but it makes perfect sense, because actually, is your front serving web server or your API server, is that business critical? And the answer is like 100%. But is that necessarily the vehicle where data goes through that is sensitive or critical? It's two different things. It's another way to sort of measure your systems, which, that's actually quite an interesting concept. But go back to those millions of services that are in AWS, and you obviously want the latest new buttons and all the innovation and blah, blah, blah. In a highly regulated industry like the banking one, how do you align that with the business, with business priorities versus innovation, and what's a roadblock or things that consistently you hit?
I think sort of touched on a little bit before. Typically, the upside, certainly for where I currently work, is having that all as part of Agile does let us go. You've got a business idea. There's that sanity check around, do technology think that this is possible? And then you've got okay, can this be done with the existing modules that we know about and have approved? So if that answers yes, then we're actually pretty comfortable, and we can fast track applications through. So we say, we know that bit's safe. All you're doing is something cosmetic here, or you're pulling in this information. Great. And those are the nice, easy ones. The challenge is where we're looking at a request that is requiring new functionality, or possibly an entirely different channel. So obviously, being a bank, we have mobile applications. Everyone's got a mobile application. What happens if we want to do something different for whatever reason? Is there a different channel that we need to use for an accessibility requirement, or do we need to do something different for certain classes of customer, whether they be vulnerable customers that need something additional or different? Are we wanting to take on customers in a different part of the world? So we started to make some different decisions there, and each of those will be the ones that have a risk decision associated. So if it's a purely technological assessment, great, we'll go and have a look at whatever the new technology is. We'll highlight the issues. We'll put some sort of quantification on it. And this is an area where there's different approaches to doing it. And I'll come back to that in a second. Where it's more, we want to do this in different parts of the world, it might be that, okay, we're going to start conducting business in country X. That might just be a much higher risk. That's not really a cyber issue anymore. That becomes a business decision. It could potentially be an HR decision. Do we want to have employees in that part of the world? Is it a country that is actually sanctioned? Would we be able to do that at all? So it might be that initial idea from the business is kiboshed by HR. It might be kiboshed by legal. So there's a full team that should be doing this piece of work, not just security. So being able to sit in that kind of workshop and be just another one of the risk guidance team. Makes life a lot easier. So my role where I currently sit, I'm just a part of operational risk. It means I'm not necessarily affiliated to IT. I'm not affiliated to the DPO. I'm not affiliated to legal. I look at cyber risk in the round, and it means that I can not cherry pick, but I can get information requested from colleague help. I can get information requests from HR if I need. And I think that's the bit that helps us embed properly once you get up to board level, because then the board goes, there's our operational risk numbers. It's not cyber, that big, scary, new, complicated thing, because some boards would still see that as the case because it's relatively new in the grand scheme of risks, and it's incredibly dynamic compared to some of the other ones. But if it's just another, here's an operational risk, yep, there's the cyber bit of it, there's the tech bit, there's the data bit, we get this in the round, let's make some decisions.
But the innovation piece versus the regulation piece, and my gut feeling is, and not even my gut feeling actually, because I've tried to sell products into some financial organizations and we've lost out on the basis of it's two guys in a shed. Even if it's absolutely the best product in the world and whatever, that risk is too much that it's this. And even not even two guys in a shed. Sometimes it can be a very amazing startup, but it arrives at a bank before it's got enough employees or enough whatevers. So I feel like banks
that
particularly,
does a bit.
yeah.
And that really comes back to that operation resilience piece. A bank's got to look at it. So, okay, that service, that application, that tool, whatever it is, if that goes down, what do we do? Okay, if it's critical enough, what assurance do we have that it won't go down? And that can be, if I look at what a third-party oversight team look at, does this look like a stable company? Does it have the relevant funds? Has it got the capital? Is it growing? Is it stable? Even director checks. Do the people in charge of that organization have any criminal record? There's a lot of elements that all reduce that decision risk down. If we say IBM is going to provide this, that's generally a pretty low risk decision for an organization because they know what IBM does. It's there. It's got a whole slew of if something did happen to IBM or if they mess something up, there's a whole lot of things that would be done.
Yeah.
If it's two people in a shed, what is that backup? What's going to happen from a legal perspective or a financial perspective if something goes wrong? So, in thinking about a couple of startups I've seen go through the process, there is definitely that mileage in selling the product or service to smaller financial services first and working your way up, because that decision line, if you're looking at a global, one of the big 5 or 6 banks, they're going to be looking at, well, you're only in one country. That might be a problem for us. So you start to get to some fairly high tier decisions. Whereas if you're looking at a small local community financial center, then they might actually be able to say, yeah, we can take you on. Do you want a desk in our offices? There's a totally other end of the spectrum there. But we've seen that in some countries where a bank may well just go, yep, we like what you're doing. Do you want to be part of our payroll?
That's definitely the easier way of doing it. It may tickle me talking about IBM because the old joke in IT that nobody got fired for buying IBM, still true today, still going. I want to come into some of the other stuff that's outside of your sort of day-to-day role.
Sure.
And we mentioned that you're the deputy chair of the Information Security Forum, and you do a lot of stuff around thought leadership in there. Can you just give us a bit of an insight, unpack, what the mission is and what comes out of this forum?
Sure. So it's one I came to after sort of sitting on a number of community organizations. So I as part of this journey along, I realized probably about 2003 or 4 that it was the community that was making security work. So started working with like ISACA, and then ended up joining a company that was a member of the ISF, so getting more visibility there, and then the Chartered Institute of Information Security. So of those, they've each got an aim to effectively improve security in their community. The the ISF specifically is a not-for-profit member organisation. So typically, the main population that's members of the ISF are Fortune and FTSE kind of 50 or 100 companies, but there's a lot of smaller ones as well. It's just, it makes a lot of sense to use something like the ISF in things like heavily regulated roles. So we see a lot of financial services, for example. But there's a number of small organizations that use it for slightly different reasons. And I'll kind of touch on both ends. So I'm just trying to remember how many years it's been around. It's certainly 26, I think I have in my head. I may be wrong, and I'll apologise to the chair if I have, but I think it's about there. The aim is very much to provide a set of tools and research and community out to the membership. Now, the tools are very useful. I use a couple of them, but a lot of organisations use bits. I've mentioned the standard of good practice already. It's effectively a set of standards for information security and IT security based off a massive expanse of organisations that have either been members or who have had benchmarks done, or who have published their standards and policies and so on. It effectively gives you an opportunity to measure yourself at any part of your security controls, your environment, framework, etc., against a pretty good bar. And you can set that bar to be, higher risk, lower risk, etc. And helps articulate what sort of improvements are needed to get yourself to the next level. So it is, in fact, a standard of good practice. It goes down to the nth degree, so you can go really into depth as to what your IT staff need to do. Or you can take it at policy level and go, this is what we're trying to do. Here's the guidance. But not only that, there's a number of other tools that align and fit in with it. There's the IRAM tool, which is effectively a risk assessment methodology, plugs into your standard good practice. There's a relatively new tool that helps quantify cyber risk. There's a third-party cyber risk assessment tool. The way the thing's set up now is that it's basically a package, and all of these interlink. So if you are trying to improve your risk using IRAM, you've got standard good practice to build bits to go in that side. You've got your third-party assessment tooling that helps you feed in from that side. So you can get a good picture of how secure and how solid and how risk managed your organization is. So as a core, that's the main body of what is provided to all members for free. Now, to help make sure that remains current and ahead of the curve and so on, there's also research provided. Now, each year, there's a number of topics for research, and they get voted on by the membership. So if a sufficient quantity says, actually, we want to really know about quantum computing, research will go and be done. So one of the things that small organizations use the ISF quite effectively for is almost additional staffing. It's like having some research staff on your payroll that can go off and do things. So, gaining additional information about AI ahead of the European AI Act coming in, that was very useful to a lot of members. It's not just what's the legislation going to look like? What does this mean? And one of the tools that the ISF produces, called Threat Horizon, actually has a forward-looking, sort of 2 or 3 years ahead into the future. What could happen? What would be our scenarios that would impact us negatively? What's likely? What's unlikely? But if it did happen, it would be really bad for us. So that also gives folks like me a really good opportunity to sit with my board, say, these are some possibles. We're quite well protected against this, but if this scenario happens, we're not so well protected. I would like to do something to improve that. And it takes into account not just tech, but also combinations of things like climate change driving global unease, even migration of humanity. Combine that with the unsettled nature of Russia and Ukraine, Israel and the surrounding areas, even America with some of the stuff it's doing, China, Taiwan, and so on. We've got a whole series of different threats. If they all aligned or something happened at the same time, what would that mean to us? So the Threat Horizon gives a pretty rational view of optimistic and pessimistic outcomes that could happen here. So very, very useful. And in terms of the community itself, it's an opportunity for all of us to meet with peers and sanity check ourselves. I mean, that is one of the other things I do with community quite a lot is I'll sit down with CISOs, heads of risk, CROs, and almost have we're seeing this, we're doing this, are you doing the same? And that's quite high value that you don't really get any other way. Because we all kind of think we're doing things right. But when you look out into the market, well, they're doing something really clever. How do I emulate some of that? And it breaks down some of those barriers where in the past, security was, don't tell anyone anything, it's ours, eyes only. Now, security is very much if I get better at this, then my wider community gets better as well. So there's a lot more of that sharing.
Yeah, I've definitely seen that uptick as time's gone on. And we do a lot of work with airlines, and airlines are particularly good at cross chat and having weekly or monthly calls where, we're seeing X, Y, Z. We're all airlines. We're all going to be attacked the same way. So they do a lot of information sharing. And I'm very glad about it because there definitely was like a keeper's mentality where
it really was. It was seen as an operational advantage or a commercial advantage.
Yeah, like you Gollum with his information. It's like, that's not helpful. We need to learn from each other. But I want to go back one step. I'm just interested in that threat horizon. The threat, because it sounds unbelievably complicated, but what does that actually look like in terms of a consumable? It's like a set of documentation that is filled out, or it's actually a piece of software. What does that look like?
Yeah, it's actually a set of documentation. So it's initially pulled together by the researchers, and then members of the ISF. We have a number of events each year. Some are local, and then we have our global congress each year. And at that, members are asked to go through and provide comment. So it's very heavily peer reviewed by various tiers. So members get to do that, and then it's distilled down to here's how those scenarios might look. Here are things you could do about it, which is the high value for any security team or wider team. There's also effectively an executive summary that comes out that is, this is what your board needs to be thinking about. So currently things around, as I mentioned, sustainability, AI, and so on are very high on everyone's agenda. Organizations are moving towards using AI. We know this. AI is not very good for the environment. We know that. So how's that going to be balanced? There's a series of information points that boards should be starting to think about, but also then the supporting information underneath for teams to be able to provide their boards with the information as it's relevant to them. So guidance on how we could look at our supply chain and understand what their ecological footprint is. Do we want to have visibility of that entire chain? Do we want to ask each of our suppliers whether they use AI, and if they do, what for? So that we can start building. There might be some risk from the things that AI doesn't currently do very well, but also it uses power. It uses an awful lot of power. If I want to be able to articulate to a regulator what my carbon footprint is for the entire end to end, for a small organization, this might be quite easy. For a global multinational, you're talking an awful lot of effort. So there's some guidance in there as well on how you would approach that. It's updated every year. Plus, there's additional supporting information that comes around. The CEO of the ISF, Steve Durbin, he provides a lot of updates on exactly this sort of thing to members, and then provides podcasts out to non-members as well that are pretty high value, and they give a taster for those folks who aren't members currently.
It'd be interesting if they ever really take the the green agenda to the edge, because all those Python coders are going to be in big trouble because it uses 10 times more energy than C++. So C++ is going to come back into fashion big time if we ever get to the end of that one. But
and we'll be back into risk processors.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Super interesting stuff. Before we let you go, we like to have one sort of personal question, which the CISO of Expel dubbed it the DeLorean question. And that's if you could go back in time and give yourself one piece of professional advice or other, what would that be?
I mean, this might not be the sort of thing that I would necessarily say to my kids, but I probably wouldn't have bothered aiming for a master's degree, and I would probably have left university a bit earlier, because in reality, university gives you the ability to learn and gives you that preparation, but it really didn't prepare me for anything that I do in my professional life. I did engineering, which is good. You understand how electronics work and so on. But in reality, every single thing that I've done this century has just been from experience and working in the field. So while I think university is still useful and they can get you a certificate that gets you at a certain level into something, they're not a patch on gaining experience. So my eldest, he's just in his final year doing a cybersecurity degree. And the most important thing I've driven into him is get your internship, get yourself a job for this final year. So he's done that. So by the time he graduates, he'll have had a year of experience under his belt. And honestly, I think that's the single best thing he could have done. The degree itself is good. It's at Napier University, which is produces some of the best cybersecurity graduates. But that experience is what an employer is going to look for. So,
yeah, that's very, very sound advice and a great note to leave us on. Rory, thank you so much for giving us your time. You've been totally great. Any parting words?
No, I just think be aware that the pace of change in cyber is continuing to accelerate. It'll never get boring. There's always a discussion around roles that are required. There's never going to be a gap. Never going to be enough people to fill all the gaps in the cybersecurity industry. So, it'll be there for the rest of your career. Why not join cybersecurity and have a career for life?
You will never be out of a job. That is absolutely for sure.
Yep.
Yeah, solid. Rory, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
This episode was produced and edited by Daniel O'Hanna and Thomas Morvidson, sound editing and mixed by Bren Russell. I'm Ganesh the Awesome, and if you're ready to deep dive and start transforming the way you approach cloud practices and cybersecurity strategies, then the team and myself at Global Dots are at your disposal. We are cloud innovation hunters, and we search the globe looking for the future tech solutions so we can bring them to you. We've been doing it for over 20 years. It's what we do, and if I don't say so myself, we do it pretty well. So have a word with the experts, don't be shy, and remember that conversations are always for free.